Here's something your biology teacher probably skipped. For most of human history, almost nobody knew sex caused pregnancy. Not vaguely knew, didn't know at all. You can Google conception in 2 seconds. Entire ancient civilizations built religions, art, and law around a mystery they couldn't solve. And one theory about how they finally cracked it sounds almost too strange to be true. Think about what that actually means. Not a missing chapter in a textbook. A complete, total blank at the most foundational level of human existence. For hundreds of thousands of years, babies arrived. People had sex. And the connection between those two things simply wasn't there. Not hidden, not suppressed, just absent. And here's the part that should make you feel slightly uncomfortable the next time you scroll past a pregnancy announcement on Instagram. The scientific, airtight textbook answer, sperm meets egg, 9 months later, baby. That wasn't confirmed until 1875. Not ancient times. Not the Middle Ages. 1875. Most of what came before was guesswork, mythology, and a series of explanations so strange they sound like something a 5-year-old invented. Except some of these explanations came from some of the smartest civilizations in human history. So the question isn't just what ancient humans thought sex was for. The real question is, what does it reveal about us that we got it wrong for so long? Let's go back. Way back. Anatomically modern humans have walked the earth for roughly 300,000 years. For most of that time, the evidence suggests that people understood some kind of relationship existed between sex and children. The same way you might understand that eating certain plants makes you sick without knowing anything about toxins. A rough, observed pattern. But understanding a pattern and understanding the mechanism are completely different things. And the mechanism, the invisible, 9-month delayed chain of events connecting one act to another, was genuinely, profoundly, almost impossibly hard to work out. Here's why it was so hard. 9 months is a long time between a cause and its effect. The first 4 months of pregnancy aren't obvious to anyone looking from the outside. And sex, for most of human history, wasn't a rare or ceremonial event tied neatly to one partner. It was frequent, varied, and social in ways that make tracing cause and effect extremely difficult. Add to that the fact that not every act of sex results in a pregnancy, which it doesn't. Not even close. And you start to see the problem. From the outside, looking with no biology education and no calendar, the connection between sex and a baby born 9 months later is genuinely not obvious. It requires a specific kind of abstract, pattern-tracking thinking that takes time, repetition, and a shared cultural vocabulary to develop. Holly Dunsworth, a biological anthropologist at the University of Rhode Island, calls this reproductive consciousness. The cognitive capacity to connect what you did 9 months ago to what is happening right now. And her argument is striking. Of the entire animal world, this kind of knowledge appears to be unique to humans. It didn't come built in. It had to be figured out. So what did people believe instead? Here's where it gets interesting. Because the answers are not what you expect. The early 20th century anthropologist Bronisław Malinowski spent years living among the Trobriand Islanders of Papua New Guinea in the 1910s and 1920s. What he found there sent genuine shockwaves through the academic world. The Trobrianders, he reported in 1927, did not believe that sex caused pregnancy. At all. Not as a vague guess, not as a myth they half believed. The concept of a man fathering a child in any biological sense simply didn't exist in their framework. Babies, they believed, arrived when ancestral spirits entered a woman's body, usually through her head. Occasionally through her foot if she walked on the beach at the wrong moment. Sex, in their understanding, wasn't the cause of pregnancy. It was just something people did. Now here's the part that later anthropologists found even more fascinating. The Trobrianders weren't confused or irrational. They were working with a coherent internal logic. When subsequent researchers dug deeper, they discovered that Trobriand belief did involve semen, but not as the cause of life. Semen was believed to coagulate menstrual blood, which would eventually form the fetus. The spirit provided the life force. The man provided a kind of raw material. The woman provided the vessel. It was a system. A wrong system, by modern biological standards, but a complete and internally consistent one. This matters because the Trobrianders were not an isolated curiosity. They were one data point in a much larger pattern. Across at least 18 documented societies in lowland South America alone, including the Bar of Venezuela, the Ak of Paraguay, and the Arawet of Brazil. Anthropologists have recorded a belief called partible paternity. The idea is exactly what it sounds like. A child can have multiple biological fathers. Not a legal arrangement. Not a metaphor. A literal biological belief that if multiple men sleep with a woman before or during her pregnancy, each of those men contributes physical material to the child being formed. Each man becomes, in a real and recognized sense, a co-father. A 2010 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences by researchers Robert Walker, Mark Flinn, and Kim Hill found that partible paternity beliefs may be present in up to 70% of Amazonian cultures. 70%. This wasn't a fringe idea in a handful of isolated villages. It was the dominant framework across one of the most populated regions of the ancient world. And here's the part that makes this more than just an anthropological curiosity. Anthropologist Stephen Beckerman, who spent years studying the Bar people specifically, found something unexpected. Children with multiple recognized fathers had a survival advantage. A Bar child with 2 or more acknowledged fathers was approximately 16% more likely to survive to age 15 than a child with only 1. Among the Ak, having multiple fathers appeared to offer protection from violence, which was the primary cause of child mortality in that community. In other words, the wrong belief about biology was producing a social structure that kept children alive better than the alternative. The theory wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a survival strategy, dressed up as biology. But here's the question that should be sitting in the back of your mind right now. If partible paternity was so widespread, if so many cultures believed that babies were assembled from multiple contributors, what changed? How did the one father, one mother model become the default? And what does the answer to that question tell us about how the concept of the father was actually invented? This is where the domestication theory enters. And this is the theory that sounds almost too strange to be true. The leading hypothesis among anthropologists for how humans first made the firm connection between sex and pregnancy isn't a philosophical breakthrough. It isn't an ancient genius sitting under a tree and working out cause and effect. It's cows. Or more precisely, it's the observation of domesticated animals. The argument goes like this. Before the Neolithic Revolution, roughly 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, most humans were hunter-gatherers, with no systematic exposure to the controlled breeding of animals. You might observe animals mating in the wild, but wild animal behavior is chaotic, seasonal, and hard to track. You see the mating. You don't necessarily see the outcome 9 months later in a controlled setting. But once humans began domesticating livestock, goats, sheep, cattle, something changed. For the first time, you could isolate a female animal. You could control when she mated, and with whom. You could watch her belly grow. You could count the months. You could test the connection. Keep a female animal away from males, and she doesn't produce offspring. Allow the mating, and she does, reliably, repeatably, on a trackable calendar. The controlled environment of animal husbandry created, for the first time, the conditions under which the 9-month connection between sex and birth could be actually verified rather than vaguely guessed. The blog Motherhood in Prehistory, written by prehistoric archaeologist Katharina Rebay-Salisbury of the Austrian Academy of Sciences, puts it directly. Hunter-gatherer societies that do not breed livestock are far more likely to lack the firm connection between sex and pregnancy. Societies that domesticate animals tend to have it. That correlation isn't a coincidence. It's a natural experiment 10,000 years in the making. This is also, incidentally, why the Neolithic period, the era of early farming and animal domestication, tends to be the point at which archaeologists begin finding clearer evidence of paternity consciousness in burial sites, in art, and in early legal codes. The plaque found at Adelhike, the 900-year-old Neolithic settlement in what is now central Turkey, shows two figures embracing on one side and a mother and child on the other. It's among the earliest material evidence we have of humans explicitly linking sexual partnership to parenthood. Not proof of full reproductive understanding, but a suggestive early step. And what happened once that connection solidified? The consequences were enormous. The moment a man could be identified as the biological father of a specific child, not one of several contributors, not a spirit guide, but the father, everything downstream of that idea shifted. Property now had a specific heir. Bloodlines became trackable. Marriage laws emerged that had nothing to do with love or companionship and everything to do with ensuring the biological certainty of fatherhood. Inheritance, surnames, dowries, virginity tests, cuckoldry laws. Every one of these is downstream of one cognitive shift. The moment humans cracked the 9-month mystery, they didn't just gain biological knowledge. They reorganized society around it. The concept of the father, as we understand it today, as a legal, moral, biological, and social category, may be less than 10,000 years old. In the timeline of human existence, that's recent. That's this morning. Now here's the deepest part, because there's a final piece of this story that ancient history and modern reproductive science both point to, and it's the piece that Aristotle, for all his brilliance, got catastrophically wrong. Even in the ancient world's most sophisticated civilizations, the full mechanics of conception remained murky. Aristotle, writing in the 4th century BC, at the height of Greek intellectual culture, argued in his work On the Generation of Animals that women contributed nothing to conception except a passive vessel. Men provided the seed, the active principle, the form. Women provided the material, the raw clay. The mother, in Aristotle's framework, was essentially a living incubator, not a co-creator, a container. This wasn't a fringe view. It was the dominant theory in Western science for almost 2,000 years. Hippocrates had proposed a two-seed theory, that both sexes contributed biological material, but Aristotle rejected it. And because Aristotle's work underpinned European medical education into the Renaissance and beyond, the mother's biological contribution to her own child remained scientifically invisible for 20 centuries. The egg cell wasn't discovered until 1827. The actual fertilization of a human egg by a sperm cell wasn't observed until 1875. 2/3 of the way through the 19th century, within living memory of people's great-great-grandparents. So yes, ancient humans understood that sex and babies were connected. Most of them. Eventually, with help from cows. But the actual mechanics? The idea that life is built from an equal contribution of two cells, one from each parent? That took until the year Ulysses S. Grant was the U.S. president. Which brings us back to that cave wall. You're staring at ochre and charcoal on limestone. 30,000 years old. The handprints, the animals, the repeating symbols that archaeologists still argue about at conferences. The people who made these images understood fire, migration, season, story. They survived ice ages. They crossed oceans. They built civilizations from nothing. And they were standing right in front of the greatest mystery of their existence, making art about it, building religions around it, and the answer was hidden from them in a way it is hidden from no child born today, with a smartphone and a curious parent. The biology teacher probably skipped this lesson. But it's the one that explains everything else. That's still us.